This is Between Hook Sets. I'm Jason Walter from In Through the Outdoors with my partner in slime, Kurt Underhill from the Fishing Crew.
What is going on, buddy?
I don't know, but I was for 1 minute there thinking that maybe the internet had run out of money and was going to quit working because I kept hitting the button and wasn't going anywhere. Like, I hit the button.
Yeah, I even asked you, did you hit the button?
Yeah, I hit the button and like, well, so yeah, I don't know. I was working on this computer over here with music, and it went funny. It locked up on me this morning in the studio. So I don't know, it just whatever. It is what it is. Maybe there was good news about Snap or something that came along and just inundated the internet so much that got taken over. And man, you can't have the news on without hearing about all that stuff. And maybe they got it taken care of. I don't know. I don't care. The one thing that I've noticed is none of it affects me at all.
Yeah.
Beyond the fact that when the government was shut down, I didn't get to stop paying taxes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
but anyway. We're going to talk a little bit about Snap tonight, but a Snap instead of benefit. So if people don't know who our gentleman tonight, Mark Romanack, is, he's been around for a long, long time. We'll bring Mark in and get his story. How are you tonight, Mark?
Kurt, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Jason.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great that you got back to us right away. I'm thinking, well, the guy's a busy dude, TV show and all, and you got back to me relatively quickly there. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, that's always my pet peeve in this business is communication. So that's what we're doing, right? We're communicating.
Right. Yeah.
Really making a point to it.
A lot of them are terrible at communicating, right?
It just drives me nuts when I reach out to someone and I don't hear back from them. So that's my pet peeve. So no worries. Actually going to be on the water tomorrow. We're going to be chasing some steelhead in the Manistee River. So cross your fingers and hope for the best for us, because we have a 1-day window to get it done. And our deer season starts here in Michigan pretty quick. So we're running out of time, if you get my drift.
Yeah.
It's hard to be in a boat and a deer stand at the same time. So,
well, I was flipping through TV last night and saw the Wardens of the North, and it was about the Michigan game wardens. They look pretty. I just caught a little bit of it, but they look like they were pretty salty up there. So you better be following your P's and Q's when you're out there.
A little backstory: our videographer Gabe Van Warmer actually does shoot a lot of the shows for the Wardens, and so he's the videographer behind the scenes in those.
Oh, cool!
For about 15 years.
So yeah. Well, obviously we know you're from Michigan, but give us a little who you are, where you're from, and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I've always lived in Michigan, and I guess I've always known that I was going to work somewhere in the outdoors. I didn't really have a plan other than like a lot of other young men at the time. I went to college, got a degree in fisheries and wildlife management, law enforcement. Thought maybe I might be a conservation officer. That was my grandfather was a conservation officer. None of that came to pass. I graduated from college in 1981 at the peak of affirmative action. And so I see you're smiling there. And affirmative action really wasn't something that was a benefit to men of my era, so to speak. And so I started looking for other ways to make a living, because it was abundantly obvious I wasn't going to be a biologist. I wasn't going to be a conservation officer. And so I got into outdoor writing, and largely to supplement my income and my outdoor habit. And outdoor writing led to outdoor television, and led to, of course, being involved in our precision trolling app. And 30 plus years later, I'm still doing it. So I didn't have the plan that I was going to become an outdoor communicator, but that's exactly what ended up happening.
Worked out well for you.
I'm pretty content and very blessed. And now my son, Jake, is carrying the torch. So he's a co-host for the television show. Great communicator, great fisherman in his own right. In fact, I wish I knew as much about fishing as he does when I was 30 years old. And he has jump-started his career. He's had a lot of really great people as mentors over the years.
Yeah, well, think about that. That's pretty cool.
In it. It really helps when your dad's ingrained in it, and I mean, his whole life has probably been around that industry. So you fall in love with it. So for those who don't know, Mark and his son have Fishing 411. You can find that. You kind of rattled off before the show of all the places that you guys are on.
Yeah, lots of places. We do business with Outdoor Sportsman's Network. That's the Sportsman's Channel. That's World Fishing Network. That's Outdoor Canada, or I should say Sportsman's Canada, excuse me. And then there are affiliate on-demand networks, like things like My Outdoor TV, the new Game and Fish TV that's available. If you have a Samsung television, you can watch us free on Game and Fish TV. And then, of course, everybody's got a YouTube channel, right? We have a YouTube channel. So if you can't find us anywhere else, you can always find us on YouTube.
Yeah, that's a heck of a way to get things these days.
Yeah. So then so you got the TV show, but I think the reason we got you on tonight is your extensive knowledge in pulling crankbaits because of the Precision Trolling Data app. It started as a book and now it's an app, like everything nowadays, right? Well, nobody wants a hard copy in the boat, and I sell printers for a living, so I really like hard copies when other people have them, not when I have them.
Well, you're right. It did start as a book, and the project has been going on a long time. We got started in the late 80s, early 90s with this. And the idea was that if you could control the variables associated with trolling, your lead length, the line diameter, how fast you're trolling, if you could control those variables, the theory was that you could drag a crankbait past a scuba diver in the water who's positioned next to a story pole, and then the scuba diver could read off the depth at which that crankbait was diving relative to the lead length. And turned out it's not a theory, it's absolutely fact. And so if you control the variables associated with crankbaits, you can very, very much control the diving depth of the crankbait. And so we've built an immediate niche because, unfortunately, there's not a single manufacturer of crankbaits in the world that has a clue how deep their lures dive because they've never done anything else besides tank test them. They've never been outside of an aquarium. They've never been in the real world until you buy them and I buy them and we take them out and actually fish with them. So we feel that niche that people just have immediately, gravitated towards. If you don't know how deep your lures are diving, you're pretty much fishing blind. And these days with modern sonar, it's not a problem finding fish. The issue is getting your gear to the fish, and that's what our app helps people do.
So with that, so obviously we talked earlier, you're kind of in a controlled, similar controlled environment. But when you buy a crankbait and it says 5 to 7 feet this thing dives, how accurate are those? Is that pretty accurate for them, or are they stealing data from you to put that on the packaging?
Well, it comes from their lack of knowledge. They haven't done anything as far as for testing of their baits, and so they don't really have a clue where they're going. So they're just giving basic information based on what they're doing for tank testing. And so it's just a reference, if you will. But we've gone way beyond that. We're trying to let people know how deep a crankbait goes. How accurate is our data? Well, we measure to the inch. So that's important because sometimes you're running a crankbait very close to the bottom. If you run it too long and you run it too close to the bottom, you're probably going to snag it. You're probably going to lose that expensive crankbait. And so we want our data to be as absolutely accurate as humanly possible. So we do everything in our power while we're testing to control the variables. And we only test in perfect environment. We do not go out when it's windy and waves are terrible. It's pointless to try to do that because we can't replicate that data and you can't replicate that data. So that's part of the problem with what we do is it's time consuming. We only get to test on the perfect days, and you guys are fishermen. There's not that many dead calm flat days out there. And so
South Dakota, you get like 1 day of testing a year.
It's a little better in northern Michigan, but not by much. So, but that's what limits our ability is we have to be testing on what I consider to be ideal conditions. If that, there's a 1.5 or 2 foot waves and our marking buoy or our story pole is bouncing up and down a foot and a half, you can imagine how inaccurate that data would be. So
it'd be horrible. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So when you're testing stuff, if you, like I said, if you don't got the app, check it out. Like I just popped open the app to look at a flicker minnow, and you got 10-pound Berkeley XT, you have 10-pound Berkeley Fireline, and then you have now the new snap weight. the new snap weight thing. Now, when you're running like the Berkeley Fire line, what is your leader length? Are you running mono behind that with a leader length? What pound testage leader? Because I mean, that's all going to sway a little bit on the data, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
A little bit. People that are running braid are typically running it because they like the sensitivity of braid, and it's really about line diameter is really what's driving the show as far as their depth. And we don't preach to people whether they fish mono or whether they fish braid or whether they fish fluorocarbon. That's a personal choice. They're all good options. But if a guy were to go braid, I would highly recommend that you run about a 6-foot leader from the braid to your crankbait, and I would choose fluorocarbon. It could be monofilament, but I would choose fluorocarbon. And I would use a leader that's about the same diameter as what we test on. So, for example, if we do a 10-pound mono as our baseline, a 10 to 12-pound fluorocarbon leader would be just about ideal. And so that 6 foot is added right to your total lead length. Basically, what I would do is I would use a double uni knot to tie that leader to the braid. I'd reel up that crankbait until it touches my rod tip. I would zero out my line counter at that point, and then that leader is included in your overall lead length when you're letting your line out or your feet back.
Okay. That, I mean, just picked up a few little things there for myself. Like, you know, I don't know how many times the crankbait hits the water and I set the zero the counter, you know.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, your feet off there.
Yeah, you can be off. You know, I just don't think about it, you know, and so stuff like that. But like, you have some with leg core, right? Correct. I mean, you have some with leg core. Obviously, it takes a ton of time to even get one bait with one type of line in, right? I mean, because you're probably not pulling 3-4 baits at a time, are you?
No, unfortunately, we can't do that. It has to be, you pick one lure and you test that lure till it's done. We typically start with mono, then we go to Fireline, which is a little thinner, of course, so we know it should go deeper. And we do that because we want to see those numbers getting progressively deeper. If they're not getting progressively deeper with a thinner line, then we've screwed up. We've made a mistake, and we got to go back and check our testing. Once that's done, we usually do the 50+2 data, which is the snap weight, in conjunction with a crankbait. Of course, it's going to go a little deeper yet. Now we have what we call the 50+3T data, which is a tadpole rigged like a snap weight, a number 3 tadpole. And that goes even deeper yet, as you might imagine. And then, of course, you mentioned the lead core data. Then we also try to do the lead core data. I wish I could tell you that every single lure that we've tested has all of those data points. But usually only the most popular lures get all of that attention. And we can tell what's popular because we can see from the purchases what people are buying on the app. We can tell what lures people are actually fishing and what lures seemingly just hang on a peg hook someplace and never actually get wet.
Yeah, there's good data there, right? I mean, that's good data for all the companies. Do you then in turn sell that data back to the companies so they have an idea? Okay.
Yeah. Right. In some cases, yes. Like, for example, Berkeley, if you flip, you mentioned flicker minnows or flicker shads. If you flip over the package, you'll see a little dive curve on the back of the package. That's our data.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, they buy a license agreement to be able to do that. It's a modest investment that they do. You mentioned, you know, the crankbait manufacturers, all of them support us. So when anybody reaches out to one of those companies, I use Rapala because this happens almost on our daily basis for me. Someone will reach out to Rapala with a question about a lure, they refer them to us. Mm-hmm. And so they have so much faith in our data that they just go ahead and refer people to us and let us answer those questions. We're not in the business of promoting one crankbait over another. We're in the business of creating data and then let people fish whatever lures they have faith in and whatever lures that have worked for them.
I mean, I own a lot of crankbaits. Do you have a whole like shop just boxes of crankbaits everywhere or what? Like,
I probably have the most extensive crankbait collection in America. And the irony of it is that there's a vast majority of them hardly ever get used. Like you, sure. I have my favorites and I keep going back to my favorites. Fishermen are creatures of habit. Yeah. And so even though I have access to hundreds of lures on the app, I'm probably carrying 12 to 15 different models of baits in the boat with me. And those are the ones that have proven to be productive for me in the bodies of water that I fish. Certainly, you know, if you're fishing other bodies of water outside of what I do, you probably have a different selection. Your lures that are your dirty dozen, so to speak, are probably different than my dirty dozen.
So let me ask you this. When Reef Runners first came out, how long did it take you to test those? All the time you had to tune them?
You know, we're pretty skilled at tuning crankbaits. And I don't, it doesn't matter what crankbait you have, sooner or later it goes out of tune.
Yeah.
And Scott Steckert from Reef Runner is an old and dear friend of mine, and his lure was, how should I put this? It was sensitive to tuning, and unless you were really good at it, it would get out of tune very easily. And after you caught a fish, it got knocked out of tune, and so you had to retune it. So it kind of got a bad rap. But you want to know what? Them darn original Reef Runners, when they're tuned, they're fish catching machines.
I was going to follow up with the Reef Runners, one of the best crankbaits. If once you get it tuned, you could ever put down. I mean, I have boxes of them because they're that good. But I mean, it was there for a while. It was like you couldn't get one out of a package tuned, and then you kind of figured out how to tune them. And once you got them tuned, they were incredible. So, I mean, no knock on Reef Runner for catchability. It was just getting that initial tune out of the box. And like you said, every manufacturer, doesn't matter what it is, at some point you have to tune them. I've opened packages of you name the brand and throw it down and it's not tuned.
It's interesting. Some are better than others. I will clearly tell you that you get kind of what you paid for. I like to use Rapala as an example. I don't know that we've ever had a Rapala lure that wasn't tuned in the package. And we test every lure. We tune it before we test it. And so if it's not perfect, then we make it perfect. Their baits are very good. Salmo is another example. Their quality is impeccable. But what I've noticed in recent years is that there are a lot of baits that are coming out of China. Everybody wants a piece of the lucrative crankbait market, as you might imagine. And some of those lures are not so great. They need a little hand tweaking and tuning. I'm not saying they can't be tuned, because they can, but you have to be knowledgeable about knowing how to tune a bait. And of course, more importantly, you have to put in that effort to actually tune them. Because if a lure is out of tune, it might be losing 5 to 10 foot of its natural depth. And Lord knows how much action it's losing, because they have their best fishability when they're actually tuned. When they're skating out to the left or right of center, they're not really diving the way they're supposed to. They don't look in the water the way they're supposed to, and they don't work at catching fish the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, we got a couple questions here. Brian wants to know, is the offshore snap weight data for 50-foot lead? Are you asking if the thing is a lead ball?
Actually, we tested both, because what offshore did early on is that their snap weights were made out of lead. And then, of course, that became politically unpopular. And so they switched all of their snap weights over to zinc in recent years because they're more environmentally friendly. The good news is if you still have the old lead ones, it doesn't matter. Weight is weight. It doesn't matter whether it's zinc or whether it's lead or whether it's iron. It doesn't matter. Obviously, a lead sinker is a little smaller in diameter than what a zinc sinker would be, because zinc is not as dense as what lead is. But those differences are so minor, we could not see a difference in that. And when we post our data for the snap weights, for example, you'll see a picture of the old lead sinkers, and right next to it, you'll see the new guppy weights, which are, of course, made out of zinc. So not to worry, you can do either or, and it's going to be very accurate.
Nice. Eric's got a question here, so might be a goofy question. Does changing the hooks from, say, a 4 to a 2, does that impact depth at all of trolling?
Good question.
Great question. People love to tinker with their crankbaits, and I'm guilty of this. I love to change things on the crankbaits to try to make them a little better. And adding hooks to them, bigger hooks, is very, very popular. And this is what I always tell people. There's a reason why the hook size is on a crankbait. The manufacturer tuned it to work with the hooks that are on it. Okay. And so you can play with that tune a little bit, and you can play with those hooks a little bit, but you have to be a little cautious. Now, the example that was given here is going from a 4 to a 2. Is that going to make a difference? Probably not. Most crankbaits will accept one larger size hook without too much problem. But if you get crazy here and you decide that, hey, that 2 works really good. Now I want to put a 1 or a 1/0 or maybe a 2/0 on it. Now you're playing with fire. What you're going to do is you're going to take the balance of that lure and you're going to destroy its natural balance and its natural orientation in the water, how it sits in the water, and it's going to change its dive profile. So I tell people always the same thing. It's never a problem to switch out those hooks to slightly larger, but one size larger hook is as big as I can recommend in clear conscience.
So is that bigger hook on the back, is that going to then take care of, I wish I could get that side-to-side motion? That's going to change that side-to-side motion too then, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. It's going to, what I describe is deadening the action a little bit. And so the lures that are the best for switching out, the hooks on, are lures that have a lot of action, aggressive action baits to start with. Lures that have a side wobble, a wide wobble, you can put bigger hooks on those and usually not have any issues whatsoever. But you take a very subtle action lure, like maybe a deep husky jerk, for example, which has got a real tight action, and you start putting big hooks on that, you're going to destroy the action of that bait and destroy its catchability. So again, you can go a little larger if you want, but be careful. That's something that you're playing with fire when you start putting too big of hooks on crankbaits.
So Brian clarified his question. So your data is off a 50-foot lead. So he's talking about putting 50 foot out, snapping the 2 ounce.
He's talking about the 50+2 data.
Yeah,
and that is true. And what that is, it's a technique that we use to get crankbaits to deeper depths. As you know, a crankbait is going to max out at a certain depth based on its, the size of its lip, the weight of the lure, etc. So if we want to get a crankbait deeper than what it naturally would go, that's where the snap weight comes in, this 50+2 data. So what we do there is we let out the crankbait 50 foot on the line counter. Then we put the snap weight on the line, and then I'll go to the app and I'll consult what depth I want it to be. So how deep do I want it to be? The feet down. So I'll look up that number, say I want it to be 30 feet. I scroll up to 30 feet, and then the app will kick out the feet back, the total overall lead length you have to use to get it to that 30-foot threshold that you're looking for. And so that 50-foot leader is essential. It's essential for a couple of things. It's because it's part of what we tested. If you manipulate any of the data, you're manipulating the results of the data. And so that 50-foot lead is essential in that regard. But it's also essential because most of the time when people are snap weight fishing with crankbaits, they're also using planer boards. The last thing you want is to be trying to take your planer board off the line or the snap weight off the line when the fish is right there at the back of the boat, splashing and potentially getting away. That 50-foot leader gives you a little time to get the snap weight off without having that fear of the fish already being at the surface, already being, floundering up there and potentially getting away.
So like South Dakota, we run like a lot of 8-ounce snap weights. Like that's what I was always growing up, 35 foot back,
yep.
Snap a 8-ounce snap weight, drop it down. So obviously data is going to change big time on that because we're putting 8 ounces instead of 2. But I mean, 50 foot.
I'm sorry, but there's no question that adding more weight adds more depth, but it becomes a little slipperier slope than you might imagine. I'll give you a story that'll clarify this. When we came out with the 50+2 data, everybody loved it. And they said, well, what'll happen if I put a 3-ounce snap weight on the line? It's got to go deeper, right? And so we decided we'd go ahead and test it. And when you're testing a 3-ounce snap weight at slower speeds, 1.25, 1.5 miles an hour, you get some substantial additional depth out of a 3-ounce snap weight compared to a 2-ounce snap weight. But then when you start speeding up, all of a sudden you lose all of your additional depth. So when we started speeding up with a number 3 tadpole and got up to 2 miles an hour, 2.25 miles an hour, 2.5 miles an hour, we actually found it was running shallower than a 2-ounce snap weight. And that's because of friction. The snap weight itself is so large in diameter that it has an enormous amount of friction at high speed, not at slow speeds, but at high speeds. And so that's how the tadpole data came about, is because we were searching for a way to get these lures deeper. And tadpoles, of course, they have that diving lip on them, much like a crankbait. And so they actually dive, whereas a snap weight doesn't dive at all. It just accumulates depth based on your speed and how much line you're deploying. And so it's not a very efficient tool at getting to depth. So that's how that all came about. Your 8-ounce snap weights, we did a lot of that for targeting lake trout here in the Great Lakes. Again, it works very well as long as you keep your speeds modest. But when you start ramping up above that 2 miles an hour, the friction on that snap weight is so intense that you lose a significant amount of distance.
That's amazing. I just never would have thought that, right? Because weight's weight, heavy's heavy. Heavy should sink better at faster speeds. But that is eye-opening.
And it's interesting because, before we did any, before the app was done, before the book was done, there was a lot of work for about a year, basically baselining, proving some of these things that people have, call them urban legends, if you will, about fishing and trolling, and deciding what things were true and what things were literally urban legends. And so we did things like testing line diameter and how does line diameter affect trolling depth. It's amazing how much it affects it. We tested things like lead length and, and how much lead length, impacts on on lure diving depth. And it's a huge deal. And the big one, the one that really amazed me was trolling speed. You take a typical floating diving crankbait, you put it in the water. Most people think that if you troll it faster, it goes deeper. And I think the logic is they see their rod tip vibrating, they feel it pulling harder. Common sense would suggest it's digging harder, going deeper. Actually, that's not happening at all. While that lure is digging and trying to go deeper, you've increased the friction on the fishing line at the same time. So what you end up with is two forces, one that's pushing the bait down, one that's pushing it back up. They counteract one another. And what you end up with is a lure is going to go the same depth at 1.5 miles an hour as it goes at 3 miles an hour, assuming we're talking about a floating diving crankbait. Now, if that lure sinks, different story. If that lure sinks, speed is relevant to its diving depth, but not if it floats.
So when you're pulling these, what depth or what speed are you running?
Our testing, I like to do around 2 miles an hour. And the reason we like to do that is because that's pretty close to the mid-range of what people are logically going to troll. I mean, there's certainly people trolling faster than that. There's certainly people trolling slower than that. But 2 miles an hour is right in the middle of the threshold, which I consider to be normal. Also, the faster we can go, the better we can cover water and actually get things tested in a timely manner. When we do our, for example, we do our 50+2 testing, we go down below 1 mile an hour on that stuff, or right around 1 mile an hour. Well, that takes a long time to get that data in because the boat's moving so slow. It takes forever to actually move that distance that we need to move to get the bait past the scuba diver to collect the data that we're trying to do. So 2 miles an hour for our basic data is what our threshold is.
So Brian's got another question. On the app, offshore has its own selection with all the weights now. Are those depths 50 set back?
No, those depths are based on where the snap weight is running based on your lead length. So you have to understand that when snap weights first came out, the intention was to use them for crawler harnesses. We weren't forward thinking enough to know we were going to eventually start using them with crankbaits. Everybody was using them to get their crawler harnesses to depth. And so a crawler harness doesn't dive. So if your snap weight is running 15 feet down and your crawler harness is behind it, your crawler harness is 15 feet down. Okay. So what we did with the snap weight data is we measured how deep the snap weight is at the lead length you let it back. So because we don't know what a person's going to put behind it, we don't know how far they're going to put that crawler harness behind it. We don't know if they're going to use a stick bait or something else behind it. That's the reason it's based on that. And that's the simplest way to communicate it with people. So when you're looking at that data, you're looking at how deep the snap weight is at the lead length that you selected and speed, of course.
Yeah, I mean, wow, this will be a show I saved to go back and when it's summertime and hop in the boat and like, okay, what did Mark say again? But I mean, just it's crazy. So, with all the, like I said earlier, you said all the new baits coming out, like, and you got all these different, and everybody's trying to be the most innovative and this and that. And I remember going to like ICAST in 2009 and I think Pat O'Grady with PK Lures had his PK crankbait that had the ridges down the side. And he's like, you can pull it at 17 miles an hour and it won't spin out. And I'm like, yeah. And how do you hang onto the pole? So it's really kind of like everybody's trying to find that new niche and that new thing. And, we always hear like this time of year in South Dakota, people are talking about pulling the Walleye Nation's Creations Reaper. And they all say you got to pull them slower because they swim better slower. And that's why they were doing so well up here catching 2 state records is because of the slow action. Are you seeing that too? And is that something like maybe in the future if the app you could add, apps probably you can never quit adding data, but like speeds for reaction of baits, like, how do you look at all those when you guys have more data. I'd hate to see a trolling only tournament with you guys. Like you can only pull crankbaits and there's nobody that knows more than you guys. So,
well, the interesting thing I think about speed and how it relates to lures is it impacts more on action than depth in most instances. And so, I always look at the action of a lure as relative to water temperature. So that's just my mindset. So I know common sense in my mind suggests that if the water's cold, that you want to go slower and you want to have a lure action that's more subtle. If the water is warmer, you want to go faster and you want to, have an action that is more aggressive, and that's the logic that I've always used for this. So when you slow a crankbait down, what you're doing is you're softening the action. You're settling up the action. When you speed a crankbait up, you're livening up the action. You're giving it a more lively action than what it would have had at a slower speed. And so that's the very reason I think that manipulating your speed, you've all experienced this at one point or another, where you're going one speed and you're not catching fish. Maybe you start going through a turn, your outside lines are speeding up, and all of a sudden they get bit. That should set off a light bulb in your mind. You should say, there's a reason why that outside line got bit. It's going faster than the inside lines are going. And so speed is relative to action. And so I always try to remind people of that fact. And, when the water gets cold this time of year, it's slower and slower yet, and is what seems to produce the best. Rarely will I go faster than 2 miles an hour when that water's below 40 or below 50 degrees. We start getting down to water temperatures in the low 40s and high 30s. I'm right down to that 1.2 miles an hour. We're just crawling along. And again, I believe the reason for that is the fish are a little more lethargic. The action needs to be more subtle to stimulate strikes with those more lethargic fish.
How slow do you dare go?
You can go as slow as you want. I mean, it's like watching paint dry. You get below 1 mile an hour. And the hookup ratios go back to Jason. You may have also experienced that. If you get going too slow, you get down to that 0.75. You'll get boards to go back, but then before you can come tight on the fish, they're gone already. There is a dynamic going on with crankbait trolling that people simply don't understand. They think their line runs from the rod tip into the water at a diagonal, predictable down to the lure. That is not happening at all. What happens is all line types are buoyant. Braid, fluorocarbon, monofilament, copolymer, they're all buoyant. So if you've got 100 foot of line out on a crankbait and that crankbait's 15 foot down, 80% of that lead length is floating at or near the surface. Only the last little bit of it actually is pulled underwater down to the actual bait. What that does is it creates a bow in the line, an inverted bow, if you can picture this. So when that fish touches that crankbait to inhale it, it's a virtual miracle that the line pulls tight before they spit the bait back out again. They have all the time in the world to spit that lure out. That's why shark hooks are so important. That's why a lot of guys like braided line, because braided line sticks those fish a little better than what mono does or what fluorocarbon does. And so in order to hook that fish and that board to actually go back, that fish has to eat that lure, commit to it, swim away, and pull the line tight before they ever get a hook stuck in them. It's a virtual miracle we catch anything on a crankbait.
So we're when we look at the dive curve, right? You see the lines on the Berkeley package, that type of thing. We're seeing this gradual slope, if you will, and you're saying that we're actually seeing just the opposite in real life then.
Yep. What you're seeing on the dive curve, that's intuitive. Okay. You let more line out, it goes deeper. But what happens in reality is a reverse curve. The line is floating at the surface. When it gets close to the bait, it angles down into the water to the bait. And because you're pulling the bait forward, you're putting resistance on that line and you're creating a bow between the lure and the surface. It's very pronounced. The longer the lead length, the bigger the pronounced bow. That's why long lead lengths are less productive than short lead lengths. And this leads into another little tip that we could talk about. People are always asking me about my preferred lead lengths, and I won't fish a crankbait further than 100 feet back without putting weight on it. And the reason for that is that bow becomes so prominent that your hookup ratio drops off exponentially. If you got to let a bait back 200 feet to get it to the depth you want, you should probably be looking at a snap weight and using a shorter overall lead length and getting that bait to the depth zone, at 100 feet or 120 feet back. You'll be far more successful. All that line out there is working against you in your hookup ratios. Fish are going to bite it. It's not a problem. The problem is, are they going to get hooked?
Dumb question, but is leg core doing the same thing, or is that kind of diving down?
No. Lead core is a completely different animal because the weight is linear. It's stretched out over a long period of distance. Lead core runs more linear into the water like you would predict. There is a bow at the end because most people are running a leader at the end of the lead core. But that's the reason lead core, if you've, like me, I live and die by lead core. I love the stuff. I fish it constantly. The reason I like it is because if a fish gets close to that lure and sniffs it, he's probably hooked and you're going to land him. The hookup ratio on lead core is exponentially way better than anything else.
Really?
Lead core catches fish. It's just fishy. It's as simple as that. And that's because it does run more linear to the lure. It has zero stretch in it, of course. And so that also helps you drive those hooks home. So lead core, if you're not already using it, you might want to seriously take a look at it because in my opinion, it's the most guaranteed way you're going to catch fish with crankbaits.
And I was just thinking about abandoning it and not using it anymore.
Well, if you lived here in Michigan, you'd have to think different about that because we have to target deep fish, and it's one of the more practical ways of getting deep. And we deal with super clear water. I mean, you got to understand, it's not uncommon in some of our bodies of water here for 30 and 40 foot visibility. When you got water that's that gin clear, you have to get your baits out away from the boat to be successful. And lead core really helps in that regard. It's way back behind the boat and it's way out to the side because we're typically fishing it in combination with an inline planer board, like an offshore board.
So you still run the same 6 foot leader on your lead core?
No, that's variable. I like a 30 to 50 foot leader on my lead core. Some guys go down as much as 15 feet. But I don't usually recommend anything shorter than 15 feet as a leader with lead core. The guys that are running short leaders on their lead core are what I call structure fishermen. They're trying to get the bait close to the bottom. And so they want to control the lead length so they can control their overall depth more efficiently. If you're fishing lead core suspended in the water column and you're targeting, pelagic fish, then a longer leader is to your benefit. And that's where that 30 to 50 foot leader comes into place for pelagic fish. If you're structure fishing, I would shorten that leader up to about 15 feet.
That's interesting too.
Okay.
I'm glad we had you on. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I'm learning stuff tonight. I don't know if it's going to make a difference for me, but I'm learning something.
So what you say your go-to is lead core just because it hooks up better. Is there at what depth do you start fishing lead core?
You can fish it at any depth you want because you can fish very short lengths of lead core. It's very common for us. My son Jake and I, we each have our own boat and we each carry our own rods and reels. And so on my boat, if I'm trolling, there's a pretty good likelihood that I'm going to have 1 color, 3 color, 5 color, 7 color, and 10 color lead cores in pairs. So I'm going to have all of those in pairs. And that way, if I decide that, they're biting on 10 color, I can put another 10 color out on the other side. If they're hot on 7 color, I can put another 7 color out on the other side. And so it's a huge commitment in lead core. I think that's the primary reason most people don't do it. It's not because it doesn't work. It's because it's expensive. You have to have a rod, reel, dedicated to lead core. You're not using it for anything else. And so it doubles or triples or quadruples the amount of rods and reels you have to own and use. So it's prohibitive for the average guy. And I think that's the reason why many people would argue, well, I can do the same thing with a snap weight. You can. You can kind of replicate lead core data with a snap weight, but unfortunately, a snap weight is not as efficient at getting to depth as what lead core is.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I would have said that, the snap weight seems to be the most efficient, right? But you say lead core would be, or is. Well,
think of it this way, Jason. When you're putting out lead core, your line is, your weight is over a long period of distance. And so the line is running pretty linear from the rod tips, pretty well straight to an angle right down to the crankbait. When you put a snap weight on, now what you've done is you created a bow in the line in the middle where you put the snap weight. So when the fish bites, he has to pull the line tight enough to pull that bow out before you ever get any resistance, before you have a bite, and before the fish ever feels the stick of the hook point. So snap weights, replicate lead core data. They don't duplicate lead core data.
Oh, see, okay, see. So now so what we're talking about here, I'm backwards. You've got your. I gotta get my fingers right. So we've got the lead weight here, and we've got the crank here. So what you're saying then is that line has to become straight before you feel. I honestly wouldn't have thought. I would have just thought that it's pulling tight against that lead weight, and then you start reeling. I didn't think about the geometry of it and the slack that has to become tight. Wow.
It's like I said, I mentioned it before. It's kind of almost a miracle that we catch fish on crankbaits because the odds are in favor of the fish. Right. They have to not only eat that lure, they have to eat it with enough authority that they're kind of hooking themselves when they bite it. When they strike at it, if they don't hook themselves and then all of a sudden they feel resistance, they're just going to open their mouth. And what's going to happen? The lure is going to swim right back out of their mouth. And so, unfortunately, we've learned these lessons through underwater, videography. There's a lot of good underwater cameras that have kind of proven that that fish are very efficient at spitting baits back out, or striking at a lure several times before they actually, get a grip on it and actually get it in their mouth. And
it's funny because we always say when you miss one, how does it miss that? Like you're pulling this thing at 3 miles or 2 miles an hour. How the hell did it not hook up? But it makes a lot of sense when you talk about the bow and the line. There's too much, slack and stuff in there that they've got time. It's not tight like we have always thought it was.
Well, and we're all walleye guys here. So, the inside of a walleye's mouth is pretty impenetrable. If you ever tried to put a hook in a fish so that you could splash it alongside of the boat and take pictures of it, we do a lot of that kind of photography. And I'm here to tell you, to put a hook in a walleye and stick it past the barb takes a lot of force, way more force than you're going to generate with a rod and reel and fishing line. And so that's why sharp hooks are so absolutely critically important to crankbait fishing. I just can't say enough about putting good quality hooks on your lures.
So when you're out fishing, filming the show, are you changing a lot of hooks out?
Yeah, we pretty much switch out everything to trocars. There's a lot of premium hooks on the market. There is nothing out there sharper than a trocar, and they're made in America. It's pretty hard to beat that. Yeah. We put trocars on pretty much everything. And I always tell people, if you buy trocars, you might as well go out and buy a box of Band-Aids. Because you're going to be bleeding. I guarantee you're going to be bleeding. You're going to need the Band-Aids because you can't handle a trocar hook without cutting yourself. It's virtually impossible.
Eric says he loves that.
Yeah, he's all over that. That's good.
So Tom has a good point. Live scope shows how long they will follow. Are you guys messing with any live scope and looking at that stuff too? And
we're actually experimenting with using live scope to get data. And the problem with it is at distance. At close stuff that's close to the boat, we can get pretty accurate data with live scope, especially if you got your transducers properly dialed in and you know what you're doing. But the further it gets away, the larger your mark becomes. And so when you're looking at a mark that's 150 feet away on live scope, that mark may scan 5 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet on the scale. So that's not giving you any accurate data. It could be anywhere in between there. And so you really can't use live scope or forward-facing sonar technology to get accurate data at a distance. You can get accurate data close up. And we've even experienced, like, the 34 transducers are useless for this, by the way. They're not designed for that. The 62 transducer is a narrower beam and is much more accurate at distance, but even it is useless beyond about 100 to 150 feet. So you really can't get the data with live scope as it currently stands. Now, the technology gets better all the time. I'm not saying that it won't be there at some point, because I remember the first generations of forward-facing sonar, they sucked. And then they got pretty good. And now they're so damn good, it's ridiculous. I don't know where they're going in the future, but I can tell you that the mark as it appears on the screen on forward-facing sonar 150 feet out is so large, you can't tell exactly where it is in the water column.
Yeah, and it's not as defined. And if you don't have a snap weight on, it's going to be pretty damn hard to find. If you're more than 100, 125, 150 feet out, I just can't imagine, because I have trouble at about 80, but I'm using a 34 deucer, right?
And that's about the maximum for a 34. And we do a lot of lake trout jigging here in the Great Lakes. And so we're doing deeper than 80 feet routinely. And we discovered very quickly that the 34s were only good to about 80 feet. The 62 will get you down. You can see fish and you can see your lure 100, 120, 125 feet without any trouble whatsoever. But relative to trolling, using live scope to try to replicate data, if you're shooting at a big target like a dipsy diver or something like that, that's a much easier thing to accomplish. But if you're trying to shoot at an average size crankbait, you're trying to see how deep a number 5 shad wrap is going on 15 colors of lead core. Good luck. You're not going to see it. You're not going to find it out there.
So you mentioned colors of lead core. You were talking 10, talking 7. You know, whether the fish are biting. So talk about that a little bit, because that kind of confused me. And like, oh, so the fish can tell how many colors you got on there. Expand on that a little bit.
The color of lead core is for our reference, so we can keep track of how much line we're deploying. Right. Lead core comes on a spool of 100 meters, and you can also get them in spools of 200 meters, and you can get spools of bulk, where there's 3,000 meters on it. So every 30 feet or every 10 yards, the color changes, and the reason for that is because lead core has been around a lot longer than line counter reels have been around. And so back in the day, before we had line counter reels, when we fished lead core, we would look at the color as it's playing off the reel, and we say, okay, there's one color, there's 30 feet, there's 2 colors, there's 60 feet. You see what I'm saying? And that's how we kept track of what we were letting out. Nowadays, the color is more of just a simple reference, because most everybody has got line counter reels, so they kind of know how much line they're letting out. But still, people refer to lead core by color because it is still color coordinated. Incidentally, there's a couple brands of lead core out there that aren't color coordinated. They're all solid one color, and they haven't sold very well. And I think it's because people are still, kind of freaked out by that.
So when you're going back to that, when you're saying you have rods in your boat with 2 colors, that's just the amount of line you have on your reel.
When I spool up a lead core system, what I'm doing is I call it sandwiched lead core. And so it starts by putting a backing line on my reel. And so I want enough backing on that whatever fish I'm going to catch, it can pull out as much line as it needs to pull out on the drag, and I still got plenty of line to land that fish. Then I'm attaching the lead core, and we do that with a double uni knot. And so if I want 2 colors like you just referenced, I would spool on 2 colors of lead core. In this case, that's about 66 feet of line. And then I would put my leader on, again, another double uni knot, tying my leader on, and that leader is going to be 50 feet. And so I'm letting my lure out, I'm letting the leader out, I'm letting all of the lead core out. And then when I get to the backing, that's when I either put the rod in the rod holder and fish it as a flat line, or I attach an inline planer board and send it out to the side.
Oh, okay.
That answers. Okay. Now I'm getting it, because I'm
using one rod with 10 colors of lead on there. You're using that as kind of your line counter as well.
Well, obviously, how much line is on there. And so the relative difference is the more lead core line that you deploy, the deeper they go. And so, for example, I might want to fish a 6-rod spread. Here in the beautiful state of Michigan, we can fish 3 lines a person. And so my son Jake is fishing 3 lines on his side. I'm fishing 3 lines on my side. I would typically do something like a 3 color, a 5 color, and a 7 color. Okay. The 3 color being the outside line, high in the water column. The 5 color being the middle board, a little deeper in the water column. The 7 color being a little deeper yet, the inside board. So if I catch a fish on that outside board, I can reel that fish in without having to remove those other 2 lines. So I don't have to clear any lines in order to fight a fish, because that fish that's higher in the water column is going to swim right over top of those other lines. And that's how we fish lead core here in the Great Lakes, is what we call segmenting. I know out in the Dakotas, you guys do a lot more structure trolling than we do here. And in that instance, you're letting out enough lead core to hit the bottom. And in that case, you usually don't deploy it using planer boards. You usually deploy it using long rods to increase your spread.
We got a question here. When fishing cranks in around 6 feet of water, how relevant is using lead core or snap weights?
If you're only targeting a bait that's 6 feet down, I don't think either is necessary. Just monofilament or your braid is going to be fine. Where I start worrying about line stretch and where I start worrying about line bow is when we're starting to exceed 20-foot depths, 25, 30 foot. You get down, we have to target fish in that 40-foot range. I know you guys in the Dakotas have to fish down 40 feet. When you have to get that deep, you need assistance to get there. You're not going to get there without lead core or snap weights or tadpoles or the like. But if I only needed to get 6 feet down, I would never put all that heavy gear on there. I'd just spool up with my good old-fashioned monofilament or my favorite braided line, and I'd go catch those buggers.
Yeah. So And then when you go to wire, that's a whole different game. Do you guys ever play around with wire?
Wire is, if you think lead core is unpopular, wire is even more unpopular because people don't understand it at all. There's so many different kinds of wire out there. There's solid strand wire. That stuff's called Monel. There's stranded wire out there, 7-strand. There's 19-strand wire. There's a lot of different wires to pick from, and all of them are what I would describe as user unfriendly. They're not a lot of fun to fish with, and they're very easy to get backlashes in. And if you get a backlash on a wire reel, that reel's done. You're cutting that off and starting over again. It is not the most user-friendly. The worst of all of the wire lines that are out there is copper line. I don't know if you guys have used any of the stranded copper line. That stuff ought to be illegal. It is the most unfriendly, useless stuff I've ever seen. It is very difficult to keep it from backlashing on a reel. And if it backlashes, there's no way to pick it out. It's just junk. It start over again. And so that's why charter captains that use copper line, they don't let their customers touch the rod and reel until they take it out of the holder, set the hook, hand it to the fisherman, let them reel it in. They don't let them deploy lines and set lines because copper is too hanky. Guys that are good at it don't have a problem with it. But to take an amateur who's never used copper and put that rod in his hand, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
And you're fishing super deep then if you're fishing
50, 60, 70, 80 feet deep. And guys will let out as much as, we talk about colors with lead core. Well, copper line doesn't have colors. Copper line is just measured in feet. And so guys a short length of copper, a lot of guys will run 300 feet. I mean, that's a football field. Wow. Some guys will run 400 feet. And the living joke here in the Great Lakes is when that rod goes off, it's the young and dumb is the first one to jump up and grab that rod because no one wants to reel that damn fish because you're reeling it a hell of a long ways and it's no fun at all. It's effective. It's not fun.
So Tom looks saying then there's torpedoes. Do you mess around with torpedoes much? I know
torpedo divers are cool because they're very efficient in their design. And so they dive very efficiently for their size and for their purpose. You can get torpedo divers to some crazy depths. You talked about 8-ounce snap weights before. A torpedo diver would be a more efficient way of going compared to an 8-ounce snap weight. They do get down there. There's no question about it. We haven't done a lot of testing with them for the app. We haven't had a lot of demand for it. They're regionally popular, but like I said earlier on, we can track what our sales are. We see what people are fishing with. And when customers come to us and say, Mark, I need data on such and such a lure, I'm pretty quick to get that tested because I can already see that people are buying that lure and using that lure.
Sure.
Torpedo divers are not what I would describe as mainstream at this point.
So we talked a lot about pulling rods, right? Like, do you have any preference on style of rods or, I tell people I want to buy high-end custom cranking rods. And I'm like, in my opinion, you don't need them. Maybe I'm wrong now that we're talking to the trolling expert here, in my opinion.
I think you're spot on. A trolling rod, its function is different than if you're jig fishing or casting. That rod doesn't need to be sensitive. You're not feeling bites on it. It's a tool to fight the fish is what it really comes down to. And so if you're spending high-end money, $150 on a carbon rod for trolling, you're probably wasting a lot of money you don't need to waste. I would put that money into the reel and have a high-quality line counter reel before I would put it into the rod. The rods I personally use are composite rods. We use a rod from Eagle Claw. They're called Starfire X's. The Starfire rods have been around for decades. And basically, it's a composite rod. It is a telescoping rod. I like the 7.6 version. And the reason I like the 7.6 version is because you can reach up and grab the line very easily to put your inline planer board on. If your rod is 8.5 foot or longer, now you're choking up in the boat in order to be able to get your, the rod tip so you can grab that line to put a snap weight on or an inline planer board, on. And the problem with choking up with a rod in a trolling boat is that someone's going to step back and they're going to step on that rod and they're going to break it. And so it's just cumbersome. So you can take a 7'6" rod, you can stand it vertical right next to you, and you can reach up and grab the rod tip and grab the line, put your snap weight on, put your inline planer board on, no problem whatsoever. And trust me, you don't need a rod any longer than 7 to 7.5 foot to fight any fish you want. And I'm not just talking walleye here. I've caught thousands of Chinook salmon on 7.5 foot trolling rods. You don't need those longer rods. They're kind of cumbersome, especially those of us that are fishing out of 18, 19, 20-foot boats. They're cumbersome, those longer rods.
Yeah, I mean, you come out here during the Gov Cup and you'll see guys with their 14 footers or 12 footers or 10 footers or 8 footers all pyramid in the back of the boat. And I mean, I get it. You're getting your bait away from the boat, spreading your spread out without having to put a planer board on. But there's nothing, I mean, I don't mind 14 footers, but it also is like you have to walk all the way to the bow of the boat. I've had to put it over my shoulder to get the fish before.
No, I understand exactly what you're talking about, and because I use long rods for crappie fishing for what they call pushing and pulling.
Yeah,
and those long rods they're very effective at getting your lure all away from the boat, and you do get more bites on those long rods. But once you got a fish on, you've got your hands full. Just trying to get that fish into the landing net is a chore. So, me personally, the longest rods I'm comfortable with are 12 foot. But all of my Great Lakes trolling rods, for all my walleye trolling rods, are all 7.5 foot. They're all telescoping rods, so they sit, they sit nicely in my rod locker, so they don't lay out on the floor where they're likely going to get damaged. So coming and going, I want rods that are short enough that they'll fit in my rod locker.
So we had a question about, you hook your planer boards right to the lead core?
No, you can't do that. That's a very, very common question. I get that frequently. People think that you can put a planer board right onto the lead core, and if you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to damage the lead core. Doesn't matter what brand of planer board you're using, all of those releases have various amounts of friction. And so if you're putting that release on and off the lead core is going to get damaged. That'll be the weak point in it, and it'll break. You have to understand that inside of lead core is just lead wire. It's soft, it's weak, it has no tensile strength whatsoever. So if the integrity of that Dacron or that polyester or that microdyneema coating gets terminated, it's going to break. And so you don't put lead core into planer board releases. That's why we segment the lead core and we put the planer board on the backing, always on the backing, never on the lead core.
Yeah,
that's interesting too.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, geez, this whole thing, I'm sure you wrote a book about all this before in the past.
13 to be honest, but that's another story. Nobody reads anymore. Everybody does podcasts, so it's pointless to write books anymore. But I've written 13 in my career. So
yeah. I mean, it's a lot of stuff you learn, and a lot of stuff like last week in the conversation kind of led to this, and I'm glad we had you on. I'm glad you agreed to come on because it's incredible the amount of stuff that I grew up pulling crankbaits. I mean, I remember I saw last week. I remember when my dad, like the first time we were pulling crankbaits, and I started jerking the rod around. He goes, "Quit doing that!" And then I let it down, and all of a sudden a fish bit it. And I'm like, so just learning nuances like that of changing speed, jerking the line, doing different things that we do now from when I started. I mean, we'd go up to a cask in the fall. My dad would take old Rappalas and dip them in white house paint so we could make them look white like the smelt, and I mean, that's how we started pulling crankbaits, and like I said, counting the colors of lead. You didn't have a line counter, we didn't when I first started doing this stuff. So it's like the evolution is there, but we've also lost a lot of knowledge or don't know the right knowledge, like the line bow, right? Like we just went down like this because we're pulling it.
Well, that whole thing really surprised me. Like I told you, we did our baseline testing early on at the process of precision trolling. And of all the things that we learned, that's the one that surprised me the most. And it's very evident because when we're doing our testing, we use high vis line. The reason we do that is so that make it easier for the scuba diver to see it underwater. I mean, obviously clear monofilament, green monofilament pretty much is gone. You can't see it underwater, it disappears. So we use high vis line. And that was the very first thing that we noticed is that, dang it, all that line is floating on the surface. And then you kind of a light bulb goes off in your head and you start to understand why we get so many bites that don't necessarily materialize into hooked and landed fish. It is hard to get a hook in a fish with a crankbait when you're trolling. Yeah,
that is so interesting.
So, good question, 10-pound mono for backing?
You could do that. Depends on what you're targeting. For me, I have lead core that I use for walleye, and I use exactly the same lead core for my trout and salmon. So I go to a heavier backing just because 10-pound, wouldn't be appropriate for trying to land 30-pound salmon. And so my backing, I use braid, and I'll typically use 40-pound braid, which is the diameter, by the way, of 10-pound mono. And then I put a bumper in there of monofilament. That's where I actually attach my planer board. And then I attach it to the lead core. So if you can, envision this backing, then a little bumper for putting the board on, then your lead core, then your leader, then your lure.
So so speaking of that, you don't ever put your board onto Fireline?
You can, but to do that, you have to use different releases. You have to use releases that are designed for braid. I like the offshore boards, just the way they come out of the package. They've got the release that comes on the front is orange. That's called the OR19. The release that's on the back is red. That's the OR16. And those are designed for fluorocarbon or monofilament. And so that's just the way I set my boards up. If you're a braid guy and you just have to switch out your clips to be braid friendly.
Gotcha. Now, when you're like snap size, like what is there a snap? Are you tying directly to?
I always use a snap, always. Back in the day, the Rapala knot, the loop knot was really, really popular, and it still works really good. The problem is I switch crankbaits so fast, I don't have time to tie a loop knot every time I try, putting on a new lure. If I'm trolling a crankbait and it hasn't been bit in 20 minutes, it's out of the deal and it's being replaced with something else. And I don't have any, allegiance to lures that are turd in a punch bowl. If they're not catching fish, they come out of the program. And so I use a snap. And I like about a number 2 snap. I would go with a number 1 for walleye fishing if I could open the darn things, but my fingers sausage leg, and I can't open a number 1 snap. So I go with a number 2 is that's the smallest one I can get away with and easily open it. And that snap has to be round, by the way. You don't want a diagonal snap. You want a round cross lock style snap.
So I got a question here. Do you pop your line before you reel your fish in?
I do. I've been releasing my planer boards for decades, and
you release on the board.
A lot of people will consider that to be counterintuitive. They think if you release the planer board, you're giving the fish slack, but actually that doesn't happen at all. The way we set up our boards nowadays, so my lure is out to the side. Maybe it's the outside board that gets bit, and that board, the tallow flag will maybe go down. That board starts to pull backwards in the water. You got a fish on. So I grab that rod out of the rod holder, and the board has not tripped yet. Okay, it's still fixed on the line. And so the board is going back. As I come tight on the line, I'll give the rod tip a little snap, and in doing so, it pops the line free from the front release. And now the planer board is no longer planing. It's just dangling on the line by that back release, that OR16. When you snap that rod tip and release that board, you're coming tight to that fish instantly. No slack, 0 slack. You feel the head shake on that fish the second you do it. And of course, now the board is no longer planing. Because it's no longer planing, it swings to the back of the boat very quickly, goes right over top of those other board lines. You don't have to clear any other board lines. You reel the fish up, down the throat, right up the middle of the boat, and take the board off, fight the fish to net, scoop him, and then reset it. It's a very, very efficient system. It works super well. And I think the don't release your board mentality came out of the tournament fishing mentality, because tournament fishermen can't afford to ever lose a fish. So they don't want to do anything that they think might cost them that one fish that might be that money fish. Recreational fishermen, I'm telling you, you're not losing any fish by releasing your boards, and you're making your life a whole lot easier for setting lines and reeling fish in, a whole lot easier.
So I know in Michigan, when you're fishing out there, you're running, 3 rods a piece, so 6 rods. Do you ever not run boards?
For structure trolling, if I'm fishing in weeds, sometimes we'll 86 the board, because if you're fishing in a weedy environment, you just nicely get the planer board on and get it out to the side, and then the lure gets snagged in the weed. Then you got to reel the whole darn thing in and clear it and set it back out again. So we have a lake not far from my home, Houghton Lake, relatively shallow. It's got a lot of walleyes in it, and they're all weed oriented. And so we're pulling cranks right over the tops of the weeds. And so we don't usually use boards there. We usually long line them just flat out the back of the boat. And in that instance, I would use a 7.5 and an 8.5 foot rod, maybe a 9 foot rod. Just stagger those lead lengths a little bit, or stagger those rod tips so you're not pulling all your baits in the same plane.
Now, what I was getting at is, do you ever run stubbies off the back?
Yep, that's exactly what that would be. Yeah. And the way I would do that is I would control my rod holders so that the rods are positioned in such a way that the rod tips are separated enough that the lures are separated enough that I'm fishing clean water or different water with each lure. And, that's amazingly effective. That's where those longer rods that the guys use commonly out your way for Lake Oahe, that's where they would be very effective pulling the weeds as well.
So how far, when you say clean water, how far apart do you usually have your rod tips for that clean water?
I'm thinking you need to be 2 to 3 feet at the minimum between your rod tips. Otherwise, you're basically fishing the same water. You want to separate them out as much as you can. And so, like, for example, I do this a lot for crappie fishing too. I do long line jigs an awful lot for crappie. And my outside rod would be a 12-footer and then a 10-footer and then an 8-footer. So, again, that 2-foot separation is a minimum, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's, when you're pulling, you got your rods in the back, and just didn't know if it had to be like 5 foot apart or what to get the clean water, because that makes sense off the crankbait. You got turbulence. If your turbulence is hitting each other, it's probably affecting how those crankbaits are running.
Yeah. I'm more concerned, and when I'm long lining or just flat lining out the back of the boat, I'm very concerned about the presence of the boat and how it's impacting on fish. And fish have lateral lines. They know that boat is there. The lateral line is so sensitive, they can feel bait in the water. You darn well know when a 20-foot, crest liner or lund or smoker crab comes whipping by them, they know it's there. And they know that they don't necessarily know it's a boat, but they know it's a hell of a lot bigger than they are and big enough to eat them. And so the reality is I want to get those baits away from the boat the best I can. And longer rods will accomplish that if you're flatlining, and planer boards accomplish it if you're open water trolling.
Oh man, we've learned a lot tonight. I could go for days on this stuff. Jason, you haven't said much. What do you got? I think you got a Rolodex.
The wheels are spinning. If I don't say much, I am sitting here sucking it up, and I am learning and absorbing. Honestly, everybody's had great questions. The only question that still pops in my head that didn't get answered is, with certain boards, are you using a bead to stop that board so it doesn't come down and smack the fish in the face?
That's kind of the way that boards were historically rigged. And I think that's a reason why guys think that releasing planer boards causes slack in the line and causes you to lose fish. And just to explain a little bit, the guys that would release the boards back in the day, they would have a snap swivel on the back of the board. And then when that board released from the line, from the toe point, from the toe arm, that board would literally slide all the way down the line, all the way to the lure, and stop at that beat you're talking about. And if you rig your boards that way, I darn well guarantee you that you're giving that fish slack, and you are going to lose some fish doing that. That's not efficient. Sorry about that.
Oh no, that's all right. Getting into
my rugrat is barking. Someone's at the door.
Did not like your answer, I think.
That's what I was thinking.
Apparently so. All I can say is that rugrats, you can't trust them. So the flip side of that, though, is if you're using a planer board that's fixed to the line, like what I described, so it releases from the toe point on the front, but it's actually still pinned to the line because of the OR16 release on the back of the board. That board is fixed on the line in one location. Right. It's not sliding down the line at any point. That situation does not give the fish slack. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how planer boards work in that regard, as far as whether they're giving fish slack or not giving fish slack. And it's regional. Here in Michigan, I would say the majority of people release their planer boards. I certainly see the majority of people I see fishing, that's what they're doing. But all you have to do is travel across the Ohio border, and 90% of those guys are keeping their boards fixed to their line. It's just the way they do it. And it's not a right way or a wrong way. It's just their way and my way kind of thing. And so both methods work. I've just come to the conclusion that releasing your boards is just a little easier on the occupants of the boat, makes fishing a little bit more fun, a little less stressful, because you're not clearing so many lines in order to fight fish.
That was just going to be my question. Is there a better board for everyone than another? I
think that, these days products have gotten real good. And of course, you guys know I'm an offshore guy. I was the one that designed the offshore OR12 board, so I'm a little bit biased here. So I personally think that yellow is the color, and fish seem to be attracted to yellow. I can't explain why, but I just get a hell of a lot of bites when I'm fishing yellow boards.
You have no problem with bananas.
Boards actually work too, in all honesty.
Yeah, I mean, offshore has kind of been the go-to, and everybody kind of copied what they've done with everything else. And do you ever mess around with a planer board mast?
Fish, you're talking about a ski system, and it's interestingly enough, that's how I started. That's why most of us guys in the Great Lakes that are of my age, that's what we started with, because there were no inline planer boards back in the 70s. They didn't really become prevalent until the mid 80s is when they first hit the market. I believe the first one was the Yellowbird. And then I think the next one on the market was the Willie Sideliner, I think is what it was called. Was probably the next one that hit the market. And it wasn't until later that the offshore board hit the market. The reason the offshore board hit the market is because those other planer boards had issues. Their releases weren't very good. They damaged the line. They caused the line to break when you were reeling fish in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why the offshore board came about. There's a whole story there. We can do it in another podcast because it take up most of the podcast time to talk about that. But the people at offshore, they're the real deal. They actually fish. They actually love trolling, and all of their products have been prototyped on the water to make them as efficient as possible. That's why nobody's built a better planer board than the OR12 side planer. It's as good as planer boards get.
Tom's throwing stones. So,
oh my. Okay. Well, we are going to have you back. I'm going to tell you that right now. Let me pop some stuff up here quick. Everybody, there you go. There's the logo. That's what you're looking for. We've got this real quick. I'll keep it there just for a second so you can finish reading it. And then I want to go here because this makes me very happy. And there we go. So yeah, there's the shallow, and there's the I guess, I don't know, regular deep, whatever, but they will be deployed starting tomorrow evening, just before dark.
Don't be surprised if you come back sometime and he has a money badger tattooed on his forehead as much as
well, I got to be honest, they're fishy baits. I caught a bit of fish on them myself, and that's the cool thing about crankbaits is it's different, times in the year and different applications. No one crankbait catches them everywhere all the time. So if you get the bug, you're going to be a crankbait fisherman. Get ready because you're going to own a lot of them, and the money badgers, it definitely is one worth buying. There's no question about it.
Boy, you probably have the most historic collection, I would guess, because you've been collecting over the years. You don't get rid of them, do you?
No, and because every time I get rid of a crankbait, then later on I have a need for it, and then I go, dang it, why in the heck did I get rid of those? Now I'm back at there buying them at retail, paying twice as much as I paid for them originally. And plus I'm just a student of the history of lures.
Sure.
In the early days here, some of the lures that were real popular in our world, Hottentots, were real popular. Everybody, was, screaming the highlights of the Hottentot and what a great lure they are. They're still just as fishy today as they were then, but I haven't put a Hottentot in the water probably in 10 years.
Yeah, right. Wally diver,
traps, all the old school ones.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have you back, Mark, because this was a great start. And we're excited that you came and spent some time with us here, and it went very fast. Nearly an hour and 15 minutes. It felt really like 15 minutes. So, thank you very much for taking time away from the family and the dog, and hanging with us here. This is absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Really was my pleasure. I look forward to visiting you guys again. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Right. Hey, Mark, and you guys want to catch more data that he's got and look at stuff, check out Fishing 411.
Yes, that and the Precision Trolling app. You've got to have it. If you don't have it, if you're not doing anything with cranks, fine. But if you do anything with cranks, get it. And that lifetime membership it's just over 100 now. What's it at now?
Yeah, it's going up very, very soon here. So if you haven't gotten it, you might want to think about it because we're going to raise the price here pretty soon. So
yeah, it's going to have to. Everything else is going up.
$110, but it's going up to $129 here in the future.
Okay. All right. Mark Romanack, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Merry Christmas as well. We're getting to that point already. All right. Take care. Thank you.
All right.